I was only 13 years old when my own father, a man our entire town looked up to, began touching me in ways no daughter should ever endure. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst came 3 years later when I was 16 and caught him, standing at the doorway of my little 8-year-old sister's bedroom, watching her sleep with that same hungry look I knew all too well. That's when I knew he had to die. It wasn't a decision born from rage or desperation. It was something cold that settled in my bones, like winter frost, giving me a clarity I'd never felt before. It was his life or my baby sister's innocence. And I'd already lived through enough hell to know the world wouldn't miss the monster. I called Father Harrison Mitchell. My name is Isabella Rose Mitchell, though most folks around these parts have always called me Miss Bella. I'm 86 years old now, with more years behind me than ahead, some I'd rather forget and many more I'm grateful for. I was born right here in Millfield, Georgia, back when electricity was still a luxury and indoor plumbing was something you'd heard about in the big cities. Before I go any further with this story, and Lord knows it took me over 65 years to find the courage to tell it, would you be kind enough to hit that subscribe button for me? This old woman would surely appreciate it. I don't share my story lightly, and I'd hate for you to miss the other true stories from women like me who've walked through hell and lived to tell about it. Go on now, press that button. I'll wait right here in my rocking chair looking in the mirror today. I hardly recognize that scared little girl with tangled braids I once was. What I see now is an old woman with silver white hair always pulled back in a neat bun, weathered skin that's seen too much sun and sorrow, and hands covered in blue veins that tell stories of decades of hard work. I have pale blue eyes, a gift from my mother that have witnessed more darkness than most, but also more light than I ever dared hope for. Today, I live in this modest little house here in Savannah, Georgia, earned through honest work and determination. I have my front porch with 2 rocking chairs where I spend my afternoons, and my garden full of herbs and flowers that still bloom despite my aging hands. Why don't you tell me your name and where you're watching from right now, sweetheart? Leave it right there in the comments. I just love imagining my voice reaching places these old legs can't visit anymore. Who knows? Maybe someone from Millfield, where I was born and raised, is listening. Or even someone here from Savannah. We could arrange to share some sweet tea and cornbread that I still make from scratch. I'm one of those grandmothers who hasn't lost her touch in the kitchen, you know? As they say, an old pot makes the best stew. I always dress simply but neatly. Life was cruel to me, but I refused to be cruel back to it. Life taught me hard lessons, but it also gave me unexpected gifts. It's been 38 years since I founded the Morning Light Center. It started small in a spare room of my house, when I took in the first girl who appeared at my door in the middle of the night, running from her stepfather. I saw myself in her terrified eyes, except this girl had somewhere safe to run to, and I never did today. The center has sheltered more than 600 girls who've been victims of abuse. 600 souls who, God willing, won't need to go through what I experienced or do what I had to do. I've never spoken about this publicly before. This is a story I've carried for more than 65 years, a burden so heavy that not even my late husband knew all the details. He sensed there were things I wasn't telling him. He saw it in my eyes when I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. But he was a good man who respected my silence. He might have suspected, but he never pushed. He was the only man who showed me that not all men are monsters. Oh, how I miss my dear Thomas. It's not easy to unseal the vault of the past after keeping it locked for so long. But maybe it's time to let this story see the light, to lift this weight from my shoulders. I'm 86 years old now. What more can they do to me? Life has taught me that silence protects predators, not victims. And maybe my story will help some girl out there. No, she's not alone. That other women have walked similar dark paths and survived to tell about it. Life in Millfield back in my childhood was vastly different from the big cities today. It was a small town where everybody knew everybody's business, or thought they did. The kind of place where the most terrible secrets stayed hidden behind polite Sunday smiles and neighborly waves. The dirt roads turned to muddy rivers when it rained, and most houses were wooden structures painted in cheerful colors to brighten the view against Georgia's red clay. My father, Harrison Mitchell, owned Mitchell's General Store, the heart of our little community. That establishment sold everything a family could need: groceries, fabric, kerosene, farming tools, even penny candy that made children's eyes light up. He was the kind of man others looked up to, called Mr. Harrison with genuine respect, sought out for advice on everything from crop rotation to marriage troubles in front of others. He was all charm and generosity. At home, when those doors closed and the public mask came off, he transformed into something else entirely, something dark that still haunts my dreams even now, 7 decades later. We lived in a house right behind the store, connected by a covered Walkway, it wasn't fancy, but it was better than most homes in those days. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, a sitting room, and a back porch where Mama would hang laundry when she was well enough. The house had wooden plank floors that creaked with every step, thin walls that couldn't muffle much, and windows dressed with curtains. Mama had sewn herself before her illness took hold. What I remember most about that house was the smell, that mixture of coffee beans and brown sugar drifting over from the store, seeping into everything we owned. Sometimes when I catch that scent, even today, my stomach still knots up with memories I'd rather forget. My father was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a carefully trimmed mustache and dark hair always slicked back with pomade. He dressed well even on weekdays. Pressed trousers, white shirts, polished shoes that clicked authoritatively on the store's wooden floors. He carried himself with the confidence of a successful businessman, head held high, greeting everyone. With that practiced smile that showed off his straight white teeth, every Sunday without fail, he sat in the front pew of Millfield Baptist Church, singing hymns in his strong baritone voice. At town gatherings, he was always the first to donate money for worthy causes. When families fell on hard times, he'd extend credit at the store, sometimes never collecting from the poorest folks. "What goes around comes around," he'd say with that public face of his. "The Lord is watching, and he rewards those who help." Their neighbors? People respected him, trusted him, sent their children to fetch supplies with messages like, "Tell Mr. Harrison, my mama needs this on account." As if his name carried some kind of sacred weight in our little community. But at home? At home, he was a different creature altogether. He had this way of looking at us that made my skin crawl, like we were possessions rather than daughters. His moods were unpredictable as Georgia weather, sunny one moment, stormy the next. He'd find fault with everything. The house wasn't clean. Enough supper wasn't cooked right. We girls weren't obedient enough. Mama wasn't managing her duties properly. The beatings came for any reason or no reason at all. A broken dish meant the belt. Homework left undone meant the switch. An answer he deemed sassy meant a slap across the face that left your ears ringing. Over time, I learned to read the warning signs in his footsteps, in the way he'd slam the store's door when he came home, in the particular tone his voice took when he called for Mother. Catherine had been beautiful once upon a time. I have a few faded photographs that prove it. She had the same pale blue eyes I inherited, long auburn hair, and delicate features that must have turned heads when she was young. Before I was born, neighbors told me years later, she used to sing while she worked, had a laugh that could brighten the gloomiest day. But something in her began to wither after I came along. Like a flower slowly dying without enough sunlight. It started with what she called the endless sadness periods, where she'd stay in bed for days, staring at nothing, barely speaking. Then came the medicine from Dr. Reynolds, our town physician, dark bottles filled with bitter drops that left her in a fog, moving through life like she was walking underwater. The pills were supposed to help with her nervous condition, but they seemed to take away pieces of her until there wasn't much left of the woman she used to be. She'd sleep for hours, forget to comb her hair or change her dress, sometimes not recognize us for minutes at a time. On her rare good days, she'd manage to get up and cook, and that's when she'd make her famous peach cobbler that filled the whole house with the most heavenly smell. But those good days became fewer and farther between as the years passed, until they disappeared almost entirely. My sister Margaret came along 2 years after me. She was a quiet child with enormous brown eyes that always seemed to be waiting for something terrible to happen. She rarely smiled, spoke in whispers, and would jump at any sudden noise. From early on, she had this way of observing everything around her, understanding things without anyone needing to explain. She could read the danger in a room like other children read picture books when it was just the two of us. Before our baby sister arrived, Margaret was my shadow, following me everywhere with silent devotion. At night, we had our secret ritual. I'd whisper made-up stories about faraway places where little girls could run free without fear. Places where fathers were kind and mothers never got sick. Our youngest sister, Rose, was born when I was 10 years old, and Mama was already deep in her illness. Nobody expected another baby after so much time, and the pregnancy was difficult. Mama spent most of those 9 months bedridden, barely able to care for Margaret and me. But when Rose arrived, she brought something precious into our dark house. Joy. She was a chubby baby with rosy cheeks and the most curious eyes you ever saw. As she grew, she showed a personality as bright as her name suggested, talkative, laughing, stubborn in the most endearing way. She'd sing little songs, she'd made up, ask 1,000 questions about everything, and somehow find wonder in the simplest things. She was the light of our house, the only thing that could make Father smile genuinely. With Rose, he showed a patience he never had with Margaret and me. He'd let her climb onto his lap to tell him about her day or show him a drawing. He treated her differently, and back then I thought it was because she was the baby, the precious youngest daughter. Now, I know he was just waiting, biding his time like a predator watches its prey. Mitchell's General Store was more than just a business. It was the beating heart of Millfield. The building sat on the corner of Main Street and Church Road, painted sky blue with white trim and Mitchell's General Store written in bold black letters across the front. Wide wooden steps led up to a porch, where men would gather to discuss weather and politics while their wives shopped inside. Inside was a child's wonderland. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with colorful goods, jars of penny candy that sparkled like jewels, bolts of fabric in every pattern imaginable, sacks of flour and sugar, bottles of Coca-Cola that fizzed when you opened them. The center of the store featured a long mahogany counter, polished smooth by countless transactions, and behind it stood a magnificent brass scale that chimed melodically when weighing purchases. In the back was the stockroom, dim and crowded with supplies stacked to the rafters and a small office where Father kept his ledgers and the cash box. That office would become the site of my worst nightmares. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The store wasn't just a place of commerce. It was Millfield's unofficial community center. People didn't just come to buy necessities. They came to catch up on news, share gossip, seek advice. Father knew every family's story, every secret, every struggle. "How's your mama's rheumatism, Mrs. Henderson? Did your boy get that job over in Macon, Jim? I heard the Williams family lost their tobacco crop. Tell them not to worry about their account this month." It was there that reputations were made and destroyed, where marriages were announced and scandals whispered about. "Did you hear the preacher's daughter ran off with that traveling salesman? They say the new school teacher has been seen walking with the banker's son after dark." I started helping at the store when I was barely 8 years old. First just sweeping floors and dusting the lower shelves. Then gradually learning to serve customers, weigh goods, and make change. Father said I had a head for numbers, and those rare moments of praise felt like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. I lived for his approval, not understanding yet that his attention would come with a price too terrible to imagine. By the time I was 10, I could run that store almost single-handedly. I knew where everything was kept, could calculate totals in my head faster than most adults, and had memorized the prices of hundreds of items. It was in that store that I learned to read people the way Mrs. Johnson clutched her purse tighter when talking about her husband's drinking, how old Mr. Peterson's hands shook when he couldn't afford his monthly supplies, the haunted look in young Mary Crawford's eyes that I now recognize as the same fear I carried. I learned that everyone has secrets, that behind the closed doors of even the nicest houses, darkness can flourish like weeds in untended gardens. First signs that something was wrong with Father's attention toward me came so gradually I almost didn't notice them. There was the way his eyes would follow me as I worked, a gaze that made me want to hide behind the counter. How he started asking me to stay after hours more and more often, sending the other employees home while keeping me to help close up. The way he began commenting on how I was growing up to be a pretty young lady or developing into quite the little woman. At the time, I thought this was normal, that all fathers must notice when their daughters were maturing. I had no way of knowing that his compliments carried poison beneath their surface. I remember one particular afternoon when I was getting supplies from the highest shelf, standing on a wooden crate to reach the mason jars. Suddenly, I felt his hands on my waist. "Careful now, don't want you falling," he said, but those hands didn't move away. They lingered, squeezing gently, sliding up and down my sides in a way that made my stomach turn with confusion and disgust. I froze completely, not knowing what to do or say. This was my father. Surely he knew what was appropriate, didn't he? When I finally managed to climb down from that crate, he smiled at me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You're growing up so fast, Isabella? Soon you'll be a real woman, won't you?" Another time, he called me into the small office at the back of the store. It was late in the day, the store already closed to customers. Mama was having one of her bad spells. Margaret was home watching her, and little Rose was napping. The office smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, shadows dancing on the walls from the single kerosene lamp. He was sitting in his big leather chair counting the days. "Earnings. Close that door and sit down," he told me, pointing to the wooden chair across from his desk. "We need to have a talk about you becoming a young lady." He began asking me questions about school, about boys in my class, whether any of them had tried to bother me. He said that as my father, it was his duty to protect me from certain dangers that young girls faced. While he spoke, he got up and moved behind my chair, placing his hands on my shoulders. He started massaging my shoulders in a way that felt wrong, invasive. His hands moved down my arms, then back up, and I could feel his breath on my neck, smell the whiskey he thought no one knew about when his hands started moving toward The front of my dress, I jumped up so fast, the chair nearly toppled over. I need to get home, I stammered. Margaret needs help with Mama. He let me go that time, but in the days that followed, he was cold and distant, giving me the worst chores, scrubbing the filthy stockroom floors, carrying heavy sacks that were too much for a girl my size, cleaning the spittoon that made me gag. It was his way of punishing me for pulling away, for resisting his advances. Then came the day that changed everything forever. I had just turned 13, still a child in every way that mattered, though my body was beginning to betray me with changes I didn't understand or want. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the sunlight slants through windows and makes dust motes dance like tiny spirits in the air. The store had closed for the day. Mr. Gilbert, our only employee besides family, had left to make deliveries across town. The little bell above the door was still echoing from his departure, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. It was just Father and me in that place, that suddenly felt both enormous and suffocating. He asked me to help with the daily cash count, something I'd done hundreds of times before. We stood behind that polished mahogany counter, me on a wooden stool with my feet dangling, him beside me watching with eyes that held something I couldn't name but instinctively feared. The pencil trembled in my small hands as I wrote numbers in the ledger, my neat schoolgirl handwriting documenting the day's transactions. The clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, each tick echoing like a heartbeat. Outside, the sounds of Millfield settling into evening grew fainter, horses' hooves, children's voices calling, the distant whistle of the evening train. "Come here, daughter," he said suddenly, his voice honey-sweet, but with something darker underneath. "Sit on Daddy's lap while you work, like you used to when you were little." I hesitated. At 13, I felt too old for lap-sitting, but I had learned early that disobeying Father meant trouble, and trouble in our house always left marks. So I obeyed, as I always did, climbing onto his lap with reluctance I couldn't quite name. The moment I sat down, I knew something was terribly wrong. His arms wrapped around me from behind, holding me against him in a way that made me feel trapped, suffocated. Those rough, calloused hands that had seemed so powerful and protective when I was small began to wander, first along my arms in slow, deliberate circles, then across my stomach, his fingers spreading like spiders over the thin fabric of my dress, and then they moved to places that made me freeze with terror and confusion. My body went rigid as a board. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Confused images flashed through my mind. Mama lying motionless in her bed, my sisters waiting for me at home, the rag doll I'd left in the yard that morning, anything but what was happening in that moment. When I tried to stand up, pushing against his legs with my small hands, he held me firm with one arm while the other covered my mouth. His palm pressed so hard against my lips I tasted blood where my teeth cut the inside of my mouth. "You stay real still now," he whispered in my ear, so close I could feel his stubble scratching my cheek. "This is our special secret, you understand? If you tell anyone, especially your mama, she'll have such a terrible spell that she'll die, and it'll be all your fault." That first time, thank God he didn't go all the way. But what he did was enough to shatter something inside me that would never fully heal. When he finally released me, my legs could barely hold me up. I ran from that store like the devil himself was chasing me, stumbling through our back door and straight to the wash basin where I scrubbed my skin raw with lye soap, trying to wash away a feeling of dirtiness that seemed to have seeped into my very bones that night. I locked myself in the outhouse behind our home and stayed there until my legs stopped shaking. I could hear Margaret calling for me through the thin wooden door, her voice worried and confused. "Bella, are you sick? Mama's asking for you." I couldn't answer. The words were trapped in my throat along with the sobs I was fighting to hold. Back when I finally emerged, I went straight to our bedroom and buried myself under the quilt Mama had made before she got sick back. When her hands were steady and her mind was clear, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened, why my own father would do such a thing. Was it normal? Had I done something to encourage it? The questions spun around in my head like autumn leaves in a whirlwind, and I had no answers for any of them. The next morning, I gathered every ounce of courage I possessed and tried to tell Mama it was one of her rare lucid days. She was sitting up in bed, braiding her hair with fingers that only trembled slightly. She looked more present than she had in weeks, so I thought it might be my only chance. "Mama," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something about yesterday, about Father." She looked at me with those pale blue eyes we shared, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be. "What is it, child?" I tried to find the words, tried to explain what had happened without using terms I didn't even fully understand. I told her how Father had made me sit on his lap, how he had touched me in ways that felt wrong, how he had threatened me to keep quiet. As I spoke, I watched her face change. First confusion, then something that looked like recognition, and finally fear. Before I could finish my explanation, she held up her hand to stop me. "Isabella Rose Mitchell," she said, her voice sharper than I'd heard it in months. "You stop telling such wicked lies this instant. Your father is a good Christian man who works himself to the bone to provide for this family. We're blessed to have him when so many other women in this town can't say the same about their husbands." I tried to protest, to tell her I wasn't lying, but she turned away from me and reached for the dark bottle on her bedside table. Those bitter drops that took her away from us. "I don't want to hear another word of this nonsense," she said, already measuring out her medicine. "Go to your room and think about what you've said, and pray to the Lord for forgiveness for bearing false witness against your own father." That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom, his voice loud and angry, hers pleading and afraid. I couldn't make out the words, but the next morning, Mama had a bruise on her cheek that she tried to hide with face powder. She didn't look at me for 3 days, and when she finally did, her eyes held a warning. I understood perfectly. Never speak of this again. 2 weeks later, she had one of her worst spells yet and was taken to the state hospital for a month. When she came back, she was more broken than ever, existing in a haze of medication that left her barely aware of her own daughters. I learned my lesson well. There was no one to turn to, no one who would believe me, no authority that would protect a 13-year-old girl from her own father. In the weeks and months that followed, the abuse continued and worsened. Always hidden, always accompanied by threats of what would happen if I told anyone, Father became bolder, more demanding. The stockroom became his favorite place. Dark, isolated with those towering sacks of grain that muffled any sound. Sometimes he would call me there under the pretense of organizing inventory. Other times he would find me there and claim he was just checking on my work. I learned to read the signs, the way he would stroke his mustache when he was in that mood, the particular tone his voice took when he said my name, the way his eyes would follow me around the store. I became hypervigilant, always watching, always listening, always ready to run or hide. But there was nowhere to run in a town the size of Millfield, and hiding only delayed the inevitable. When Margaret turned 9, I noticed the same signs in her that I recognized in myself. She came home from helping at the store one day with red-rimmed eyes and that hollow, distant look I knew too well. She moved differently, carefully, like someone who had been hurt and was afraid of being hurt again. That night, as we lay in our shared bed with little Rose sleeping between us, Margaret whispered in the dark, "Bella, does Father ever do things to you? Bad things?" My heart broke for her in that moment. My beautiful, gentle sister who jumped at shadows and flinched when men raised their voices, she had become his victim too. I pulled her close and whispered back, "Yes, but we're going to protect each other, and we're going to protect Rose. No matter what." From that night on, Margaret and I developed a system of silent communication. A certain look meant, "Be careful, he's in that mood." A hand signal across the store meant, "Get Rose and go home now." We became each other's guardians, 2 children, trying to do a job that should have belonged to adults, but we were just children ourselves, and children can only do so much against a grown man who held all the power in our small world. The abuse followed a pattern I came to know by heart. Late afternoons when the store was closed, Sunday mornings when everyone else was at church, nights when Mama was too sedated to notice anything. He had turned manipulation into an art form, always making it seem like it was somehow my fault, like I had invited his attention. "You're developing into such a beautiful young woman," he would say while doing unspeakable things. "Any man would be lucky to have you, but you're mine first, aren't you? You belong to Daddy." I learned to separate my mind from my body during those times, to float above the scene and pretend it was happening to someone else. It was the only way to survive with any sanity intact. But the worst part wasn't the physical violation. It was the way he made me complicit in my own abuse. The way he convinced me that I was somehow responsible, that I had brought this on myself. It took me decades to understand that none of it was my fault, that I was just a child who had been betrayed by the one person who should have protected me above all others. By the time I turned 15, I had become an expert at survival. I knew exactly how to avoid being alone with Father, how to keep Margaret and Rose safe, how to read the danger signs before they escalated into something worse. But expertise in survival and actual escape are 2 very different things. That's when I hatched my first plan to get us out of that house of horrors. Margaret and I would run away together, leaving Rose with neighbors until we could come back for her with help. For months, I saved every penny and nickel I could get my hands on, coins dropped by customers. Small amounts I could skim from the till without Father noticing. Money I found in coat pockets when hanging up laundry. I hid our escape fund in a mason jar buried beneath the old oak tree behind our house. Margaret and I would sneak out there at night, counting our meager savings by moonlight, whispering plans about catching a ride to Atlanta where Mama's sister lived. We had never met Aunt Ruth, but we knew her address from the occasional letters that arrived. The plan was simple in the way that only desperate children could devise. We would leave at dawn, hitchhike to the main road, and trust that some kind of trucker would take pity on two young girls and give us a ride to the big city. Looking back now, I shudder to think how many different kinds of danger we might have walked into. But at the time, it seemed like our only hope. We prepared small bundles of clothing, hiding them under loose floorboards beneath our bed. We planned our route, practiced our story about visiting relatives, even wrote a letter to leave behind explaining why we had to go. Everything was ready for our great escape. But the night before we were supposed to leave, Father discovered our hidden bundles. Too. This day, I don't know how he found them. Maybe he heard us whispering and got suspicious. Maybe one of the floorboards creaked at the wrong time. Maybe it was just the cruel hand of fate working against us. All I know is that we came home from helping at the store to find him sitting on our bed with our escape supplies spread out before him, like evidence in a courtroom. The beating that followed was the worst we had ever received. He started with his belt, the thick leather one he wore to church on Sundays, bringing it down across our backs and shoulders until we couldn't stand. When the belt wasn't enough to satisfy his rage, he grabbed a broom handle from the kitchen. "Ungrateful little bitches," he snarled between blows. "I give you food, shelter, clothes, and this is how you repay me. This is how you show your appreciation." He beat us until his arm got tired, leaving us covered in welts and bruises that would take weeks to fade. It was during that beating that I got this scar on my chin when I tried to shield Margaret from a particularly vicious strike. He backhanded me with his class ring, splitting my skin open to the bone. The cut was so deep that I probably should have had stitches. But of course we couldn't go to Dr. Reynolds. Instead, Margaret cleaned it as best she could with well water and strips torn from an old bedsheet, her gentle hands shaking as she worked. Mama had such a severe breakdown when she heard the commotion that she had to be hospitalized again, this time for nearly 3 weeks. When she came back, she was more absent than ever, existing in a pharmaceutical fog that kept her barely functional. After our failed escape attempt, Father's surveillance increased tenfold. We couldn't go anywhere alone, not to school, not to church, not even to the outhouse without one of his appointed watchers keeping an eye on us. He recruited various townspeople to report on our movements, always under the guise of helping the poor Mitchell girls whose mother is so sickly. "If you ever try anything like that again," he told us the night after the beating, standing over our bruised bodies as we lay in bed, "I won't bother with the belt next time. I'll just put you both in the ground behind the store and tell folks you ran off to find your aunt. Nobody will question a grieving father whose ungrateful daughters abandoned him." The threat was delivered with such cold certainty that I believed every word. This wasn't empty bluster. This was a promise from a man who had already shown he was capable of anything. It was around this time that I began learning bookkeeping from Mr. Cornelius, an elderly gentleman who came monthly to manage the stores. Account's father had noticed my aptitude with numbers and decided he could save money by having me take over this responsibility. What he didn't realize was that he was giving me access to information that would eventually become the key to his destruction. Mr. Cornelius was a kind, soft-spoken man who never asked questions about the bruises on my arms or the shadows under my eyes from sleepless nights. He taught me everything about managing ledgers, tracking inventory, recording transactions, calculating taxes, without meaning to. He was giving me the tools I would need to orchestrate the most important plan of my life. As I became more familiar with the store's financial records, I began to notice irregularities. There were 2 sets of books, the official records that Father showed to tax collectors and suppliers, and a hidden set that contained the real numbers. I also observed the monthly visits from Vincent Castellano, a rough-looking man with a jagged scar across his left cheek who ran what he called a distribution business. Whenever Vincent came to call, Father would clear the store early and lock himself in the office with Vincent and 2 dangerous-looking men who served as his bodyguards. Through careful eavesdropping and studying papers when Father wasn't around, I gradually pieced together the truth. Father owed Vincent a substantial amount of money he had borrowed to expand the store, but had instead spent on gambling and other vices during his frequent trips to Atlanta. Vincent wasn't just a businessman. He was a loan shark, known throughout Georgia for his violent methods of debt collection. The stories that circulated about Vincent were terrifying. Shops mysteriously burned down, men found beaten nearly to death in cotton fields, entire families that simply vanished when debts grew too large, even worse. Father was trying to cheat Vincent by keeping false records, showing lower sales and profits than the store actually generated. He was skimming money from the top and hiding it, hoping to delay the inevitable reckoning. It was a deadly game of deception that could only end one way. All of this information swirled in my head like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. I sensed there was an opportunity here, a weapon I could use, but I didn't yet know how to wield. I think that knowledge would come later, when desperation finally overcame caution and I was forced to make the most difficult decision of my young life. But before I tell you about that night, the night that changed everything forever, let me ask you something. If you were trapped in a situation like mine, with no way out and no one to help, what would you do to protect your little sister? How far would you go to stop a monster who wore the mask of respectability? Because sometimes, when the law fails and society turns away, we have to create our own justice, even if it means crossing lines we never imagined we could cross. The moment that sealed my father's fate came on a sweltering August night when I was 16. The kind of night in Georgia when the air is so thick and humid you feel like you're breathing through wet cotton. Mama had been sedated after a particularly bad day, lost in her pharmaceutical haze. Margaret and I had finished the evening dishes, and little Rose, now 8 years old, had been tucked into bed in the room we all shared. I was putting away the last of the clean plates when I realized Father wasn't in his usual spot in the sitting room, listening to his radio programs. An alarm bell started ringing in my head after years of hypervigilance. I had developed an almost supernatural sense for danger. I crept silently down the hallway, my bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors. That's when I saw him standing in the doorway of our bedroom, perfectly still, watching Rose sleep with that same predatory expression I had learned to recognize and fear. The same look he had given me when I was her age. The look that preceded years of horror. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Not Rose, not my baby sister who still played with cornhusk dolls and believed in fairy tales. She was innocent, pure, untouched by the evil that had consumed Margaret and me. She adored Father, would run to him with her arms outstretched when he came home from the store. Tell him about her day at school with such trust and love. I couldn't let him destroy that light. Couldn't let him steal her childhood the way he had stolen ours. Without thinking, I called out louder than I intended. Father, is everything all right? He spun around, startled at being caught in the act. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been shame flicker across his face, before it was replaced by cold anger. He grabbed my arm roughly, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave bruises, and dragged me back toward the kitchen. Margaret stood frozen by the sink, a dish towel clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with terror. She understood immediately what was happening. We had developed an almost telepathic connection when it came to recognizing danger. What do you think you're doing? Spying on me? Father hissed through clenched teeth, his grip tightening on my arm. Please, I whispered, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. Leave Rose alone. She's just a baby. Please don't hurt her. He looked at me like I was an insect that needed to be crushed under his boot. Then he laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humanity that made my skin crawl. And who exactly is going to stop me? He asked, his voice dripping with mockery. You? That useless mother of yours who lives in a medicine bottle? Or maybe you'll run to Sheriff Bradley and tell him what that respected businessman Harrison Mitchell, who tithes faithfully every Sunday and extends credit to half the families in this county, is improper with his daughters. He leaned closer, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against my face. Who's going to believe you, Isabella? You're nobody. Just the daughter of a madwoman making up wild stories to get attention. I knew he was right. In our small town, his word carried the weight of gold while mine was worth less than dirt. He was the successful merchant, the pillar of the community. I was just a teenage girl with no credibility and no power. I could scream. I threatened desperately, though we both knew it was empty bluster. Again, that horrible laugh. Go ahead and scream all you want. Tomorrow night, I start with the little one. I've waited long enough and I won't wait any longer. And after I'm done with her, I'll take care of you and Margaret permanently. Accidents happen, you know? Girls fall down wells. Houses catch fire in the middle of the night with everyone asleep inside. The threat hung in the air between us, more real and terrifying than anything I had ever heard. I looked into his eyes and saw the absolute truth there. He wasn't making idle threats. He was planning murder, and he would sleep soundly afterward. This wasn't just about protecting Rose's innocence anymore. This was about our very survival. I lowered my head in apparent defeat, and he released my arm, leaving red fingerprints on my pale skin. Good girl, he said with satisfaction. Now finish those dishes and forget what you think you saw. And if you open your mouth about this to anyone, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The meaning was crystal clear. He returned to his radio. In the sitting room, as if nothing had happened, whistling a hymn he had learned at church. But something fundamental had changed in me during that confrontation. A decision was crystallizing in my mind, cold and sharp as winter steel. That night, lying in the darkness between my sisters, Margaret, awake and trembling beside me, Rose, sleeping the innocent sleep of those who don't yet know evil exists, I made a choice that would haunt and define the rest of my life. If the law wouldn't protect us, if society wouldn't believe us, if God himself seemed to have abandoned us, then I would have to find another way. I would use the one weapon I had discovered during my months learning about Father's business dealings, his debt to Vincent Castellano and the fraud he was committing to hide money from his creditor. Vincent wasn't the type of man who forgave being cheated. The stories about him weren't just idle gossip, they were warnings. If he discovered that Father was manipulating the books, showing lower profits while skimming money off the top, the consequences would be swift and final. I spent the rest of that sleepless night planning every detail: how to alter the records to make the fraud obvious, how to get the information to Vincent without implicating myself, how to make it look like Father's own greed and stupidity had finally caught up with him. It wasn't a decision I made lightly or in anger. It was cold, calculated, and absolutely necessary, because I had tried everything else. Talking to Mama, pleading with Father, attempting to run away. Nothing had worked, and now time was running out. Rose's 8th birthday was only 2 weeks away. I had seen the way Father looked at her lately, the way his attention was shifting from Margaret and me to our baby sister. History was about to repeat itself unless I did something to stop it, so I made my choice. If I couldn't save us through conventional means, I would save us through unconventional ones, even if it meant damning my own soul in the process. The next morning, I began the careful work of setting my plan in motion. Each alteration to the books, each false entry, each piece of fabricated evidence was placed with surgical precision. I was playing a deadly game where one mistake could cost all 3 of us our lives. But I was also fighting for something more precious than life itself: the chance for my sisters to grow up free from the nightmare that had consumed our childhood. And for that chance, I was willing to risk everything, including whatever remained of my innocence. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it now. Before I tell you exactly how I orchestrated my father's downfall, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to reveal is so dark, so morally complex, that I know some of you watching might not have the stomach to continue. This isn't a fairy tale with clear heroes and villains. This is real life, where sometimes good people have to do terrible things to survive. If you're still with me, if you're brave enough to hear the rest of this story, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button. I need to know that someone out there understands why a 16-year-old girl felt she had no choice but to become an instrument of her own father's destruction. For 3 weeks after that confrontation in the hallway, I studied Father's business operations with the intensity of a detective solving a murder case. I memorized every detail of his fraudulent bookkeeping system, every false entry, every penny he had stolen from Vincent Castellano. What I discovered was worse than I had initially thought. Father owed Vincent nearly $8,000, a fortune in those days, enough to buy 3 houses like ours. The debt had been growing for over 2 years, with interest compounding at 20% per month. But instead of using the store's profits to pay down what he owed, Father had been living a double life during his frequent business trips to Atlanta. He was gambling away hundreds of dollars at underground poker games, spending money on women, drinking in speakeasies that the local law enforcement pretended not to know about. Meanwhile, he was systematically cheating Vincent by reporting lower sales figures and hiding merchandise that never appeared in the official records. It was a deadly game of deception that could only end one way: with Father's blood soaking into Georgia. Redclay.I began making subtle alterations to the accounting books. Nothing dramatic enough to attract immediate attention, but significant enough to make the fraud obvious to anyone who looked closely. I created false receipts for merchandise that was never delivered, using paper identical to what the store already used and carefully forging the signatures of suppliers whose handwriting I had studied for weeks. The most crucial part was creating evidence that Father was hiding the stolen money somewhere specific. In the records, I invented a bank account at First National Bank in Atlanta, complete with deposit slips and balance statements. Of course, this account didn't exist, but on paper it looked like Father had been systematically depositing large sums there, money that should have gone to Vincent. All of this work had to be done in absolute secrecy, usually late at night when everyone else was asleep, or during brief moments when I was alone in the store office. Margaret served as my lookout, developing an elaborate system of signals to warn me if Father returned unexpectedly. It was during this process that I found an unexpected ally in Mrs. Henley, the cook, who came 3 times a week to prepare meals for the store employees. She was a weathered woman in her 70s, a widow known throughout Millfield for her skill with both cooking and herbal remedies. More importantly, she was one of the few people in town who wasn't afraid of my father. We never spoke directly about what was happening in our house. We didn't need to. She saw the bruises, the haunted looks, the way Margaret and I would jump at sudden noises. One day, she found me crying behind the store after a particularly brutal encounter with father. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She simply sat beside me on an overturned crate, put her rough, warm hand on my shoulder and said, "Child, some weeds got roots so deep. The only way to kill them is to poison the whole ground they're growing in." From that day forward, Mrs. Henley became my silent partner. She would distract father at crucial moments, calling him away from the office to complain about spoiled meat or ask his opinion on some recipe. She also kept me informed about Vincent's schedule. Her nephew worked for the distribution company and always knew when the boss would be making his rounds. "He's coming Thursday next," she told me one morning while kneading biscuit dough, her voice casual but her eyes serious. "Word is he's especially angry this time. Been hearing about other store owners who owe him money trying to pull fast ones, and he's not in a forgiving mood." That was my cue. Thursday gave me exactly 6 days to complete my preparations and set the trap that would end my father's reign of terror forever. On Wednesday evening, I made the final alterations to both sets of books, working by candlelight in the store office. My hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing, I created irrefutable evidence of father's betrayal. I altered the official records to make the discrepancies more obvious, then modified some entries in the hidden books to make it appear he was stealing even more than he actually was. Next, I wrote an anonymous letter using the store's typewriter. Wearing cotton gloves I had taken from Dr. Patterson's medical bag during one of his visits to check on Mama, the letter was direct and damning. "Mr. Castellano Harrison Mitchell has been cheating you for over 2 years. He keeps 2 sets of accounting books. The ones he shows you are false. The real records are hidden in a secret compartment under his office. Desk, press the right corner of the bottom drawer and it will slide out. The money he doesn't report goes to a private account at First National Bank in Atlanta. He's already stolen more than $3,000. Check the delivery receipts. Many are forgeries. He laughs about fooling you, calls you a dumb dago behind your back." A friend who values honesty, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an unmarked envelope. Then I arranged the physical evidence, leaving some of the forged receipts accidentally visible on the desk, placing a fake list of bank deposits in a folder marked private, right above the hidden books, and writing a note in father's handwriting about fooling VC again and moving another 15% to the Atlanta account. Everything was ready. The stage was set for the final act of this deadly drama on Thursday morning. I waited for Bud Carson, Vincent's driver, who always came a few hours ahead to announce his boss's arrival. Like clockwork, Bud appeared at the store entrance at exactly 2 p.m. "Tell Mr. Mitchell that Mr. Castellano will be here at 6 sharp, Bud said in his usual gruff manner, already turning to leave. "Wait," I called softly, approaching him while pretending to dust a nearby shelf. "I think you dropped this." I handed him the envelope containing the letter that would seal my father's fate. Bud looked confused, but took the envelope without question, and left. The letter was now on its way to Vincent, and there was no turning back. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a strange state of calm, as if I were watching someone else go through the motions of a normal day. Father returned from his afternoon rounds looking tired but unsuspecting. He had no idea that in a few hours his world would come crashing down around him at 5:30. He sent all the employees home except for me and Margaret. "Take your sisters to Mrs. Cotton's house," he instructed. "I don't want any of you around during this meeting. Business discussions aren't suitable for young ladies." It was exactly what I had expected, what I had planned for. "Yes, sir," I replied, already gathering Margaret and Rose, who had been playing with her doll in the back of the store. As we left through the rear door, I saw Vincent's black Packard pulling up to the front of the store. In addition to Vincent himself, a short, stocky man with dead eyes and that terrible scar bisecting his left cheek, there were 2 other men in the car. Big men with the kind of faces that had seen violence and weren't troubled by it. Vincent was carrying the envelope I had given to Bud Carson. The trap was sprung, and there was no stopping what came next. We stayed at Mrs. Cotton's house for what felt like an eternity. She was a sweet, elderly widow who had been our neighbor for as long as I could remember, always ready with fresh-baked cookies and a kind word. She had no idea what drama was unfolding just across the street at Mitchell's General Store. "Will your father be long with his business meeting?" she asked, settling Rose at her kitchen table with a glass of milk and a slice of cornbread. "I expect so," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "He said it was very important." Margaret sat rigidly in her chair, understanding without words. That tonight would change everything. Her dark eyes kept darting toward the window that faced our store, watching for any sign of what was happening inside. Rose, innocent as always, chattered happily about her day at school, completely unaware that her entire future hung in the balance at exactly 8:47 p.m. I remember the time because I kept staring at Mrs. Cotton's mantel clock. We heard the roar of a car engine starting up, then the screech of tires on gravel as Vincent's Packard tore away from the store at high speed. The sound echoed through the quiet evening air like a gunshot. Mrs. Cotton looked up from her knitting with concern. "My goodness, someone's certainly in a hurry. I hope there wasn't any trouble at your father's meeting." "I'm sure everything's fine," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "But maybe we should head home now. Father will be wondering where we are." Mrs. Cotton walked us to her front door, peering across the street at our darkened store. "That's odd," she murmured. "Usually your father keeps the lights on when he's working late. Are you sure he's still there?" "He probably just finished up and went inside the house," I said, taking Rose's hand. "Thank you for watching us, Mrs. Cotton." We crossed the street in the gathering darkness, our footsteps unnaturally loud on the packed dirt road. The store stood silent and still, no light visible in any of the windows. I used my key to unlock the front door, my hand trembling slightly as I turned the lock. "Father," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "We're home?" No answer. The store felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Margaret grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. "Bella," she whispered. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." I could feel it too. The air itself seemed thick with violence, heavy with secrets and blood. But I had to see for myself. To know if my plan had worked, take Rose to the house, I told Margaret. Put her to bed and stay with her. I need to check the office. "No," Margaret said firmly. "I'm not leaving you alone. Please," I insisted. "Rose doesn't need to see. Whatever might be in there, I'll only be a moment." Reluctantly, Margaret took our little sister's hand and led her toward the house. Rose went willingly, yawning and rubbing her eyes, ready for sleep after a long day. I waited until I heard the back door close behind them before I moved deeper into the store. The office door was standing wide open, something that never happened when Father was conducting business. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, but I had to know. I had to see the results of what I had set in motion. The office was in complete disarray. Papers were scattered across the floor. The desk drawers had been pulled out and overturned. The contents of the safe were strewn about like confetti. The hidden compartment under the desk had been discovered and torn apart. The false books I had so carefully prepared now lying open for all to see. But there was no sign of Father on the desk. Weighed down by a brass paperweight was a note written in Vincent's distinctive handwriting. "He won't be cheating anybody ever again. This settles the debt with interest. Don't go looking for him. You won't find anything worth finding." I stood there in that ransacked office, holding that note, and felt a mixture of emotions I couldn't begin to sort through. Relief that Rose was safe, that the nightmare was finally over. Horror at what I had done, at the choice I had made. Guilt that I felt no grief for the man who had given me life but had also tried to destroy it, and underneath it all, a cold satisfaction. That justice had finally been served, even if it came from an unlikely source. I destroyed the note immediately, crumpling it up and feeding it to the wood stove in the corner of the office. Then I straightened the room as best I could, trying to make it look like Father had simply been working late on the books when Vincent arrived for their meeting. The next morning, Sheriff Bradley came by to ask questions. He was a lazy man who preferred easy answers to complicated investigations, especially when those investigations might involve dangerous men like Vincent Castellano. "Seems your father had some business troubles," he told me, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Got behind on some payments to the wrong kind of people. These things happen sometimes in business." I played the shocked and grieving daughter perfectly. "What do you mean, Sheriff? Where is my father? Is he hurt?" Sheriff Bradley couldn't meet my eyes. "Well, miss, that's hard to say. He seems to have ... left town rather suddenly. Probably for his own safety, you understand. Sometimes when a man owes the wrong people money, the smart thing is to disappear for a while." It was the official story, and everyone in Millfield accepted it without question. Harrison Mitchell had gotten in over his head with loan sharks and had fled town to avoid the consequences. It happened more often than people liked to admit in those days. Only I knew the truth, that my father would never be coming back, that his body was probably feeding fish in some remote Georgia swamp, that Vincent Castellano had done what the law and society refused to do. He had stopped a monster in the days that followed. I had to make difficult decisions about our future. At 16, I was too young to inherit the store legally, but the life insurance policy father had taken out years earlier was substantial enough to provide for all three of us. With the help of a lawyer from Atlanta, I managed to gain temporary custody of my sisters, and we began planning our escape from Millfield. We left on a gray October morning, everything we owned packed into 3 battered suitcases. Margaret, now 14, was quiet but determined. Rose, at 8, thought we were going on a grand adventure to the big city. I was 17 and felt like I had aged a lifetime in the space of a few months. As our bus pulled away from the Millfield station, I looked back one last time at the town where I had been born, where I had suffered, where I had learned that sometimes the only justice available is the kind you create for yourself. I never returned. Not once in all the years that followed. But the story doesn't end there, my dear listeners. What I've told you so far is only the beginning of how one desperate act changed the course of 3 young lives. Because surviving trauma is just the first step. Learning to live with what you've done, building something meaningful from the ashes of your childhood, finding love and purpose despite the darkness in your past, that's the real challenge. And it's a challenge I'm still meeting every single day, even at 86 years old. Atlanta in 1962 was a world away from small-town Millfield. The city pulsed with energy and possibility, its streets filled with cars and people moving with purpose I had never witnessed before. Tall buildings reached toward the sky like steel and concrete prayers, and the sounds of progress, construction, traffic, the bustle of commerce created a symphony that both thrilled and terrified 3 country girls who had never seen anything bigger than the county seat. We rented a small apartment in the Grant Park neighborhood. 2 bedrooms with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom that had running hot water, a luxury that still amazed us. The walls were thin and the furniture was secondhand. But it was ours. Most importantly, it held no ghosts, no memories of terror hidden in dark corners. With the insurance money carefully managed, I was able to enroll Margaret and Rose in good schools while I completed my own education at night. During the day, I worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, the skills Mr. Cornelius had taught me. Ironically, combined with what I had learned while planning Father's downfall, made me surprisingly valuable in the business world. My employer, Mr. Davidson, was a stern but fair man who judged people by their abilities rather than their age or circumstances. I've never seen anyone so young with such a natural understanding of financial records. He told me after my first month, "It's like you can see patterns that others miss." If only he knew how I had developed that particular skill. It was at night school that I met the man who would change my life in ways I never expected. Endless. He was everything my father had not been. Quiet, where Father had been loud; gentle, where Father had been violent; respectful, where Father had been controlling. At first I was terrified of any man who showed interest in me. My experiences had taught me that male attention was dangerous, that kindness was often a mask for ulterior motives. But Thomas was different. He approached friendship and eventually love with the caution of someone who understood that trust must be earned rather than demanded. Our relationship developed slowly. Over months of shared study sessions in the school library, he helped me with advanced mathematics, and in return, I assisted him with organizing his lesson plans. "What do you want to do with your life, Isabella?" he asked me one evening as we worked through algebra problems under the warm glow of library lamps. The question caught me off guard. Want? It had been so long since I had allowed myself to want anything beyond mere survival. I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "Well," he said, with that gentle smile that was becoming so dear to me, "maybe it's time to start." Thomas began lending me books, not just textbooks, but novels and poetry, philosophy, and history. Through literature, I discovered that there were other people who had survived terrible things and found ways to transform their pain into something meaningful. I read about women who had overcome impossible odds, who had built lives of purpose from the ashes of trauma. Slowly, carefully, I began to share fragments of my story with Thomas. Never the whole truth. That secret was too dark, too dangerous to trust to anyone. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he said simply when I finished, "and the kindest. What happened to you was terrible, but look what you've done with your life since then. Look how you've protected and provided for your sisters." It was the first time anyone had called me strong instead of broken, brave instead of damaged. Those words began to heal something in me that I hadn't even realized was wounded. We married in the spring of 1968, a small ceremony in a modest church with just our closest friends, and, of course, Margaret and Rose as my maids of honor. Margaret, now 20, had blossomed into a beautiful young woman who had found her calling in social work, helping other troubled families. Rose, at 14, was excelling in school and showed every sign of the remarkable woman she would become. Thomas and I bought a small house in East Atlanta. Nothing fancy, but perfect for newlyweds. Starting their life together, it had a wide front porch where we would sit in the evenings drinking sweet tea and planning our future. He encouraged me to pursue my education, and with his support, I earned my high school diploma and then enrolled in college at Georgia State University. I studied education with a focus on helping at-risk children. My professors were impressed by my intuitive understanding of childhood trauma, though they didn't know the source of that knowledge. I could recognize the signs, the withdrawn behavior, the inexplicable fear, the way certain children would flinch at sudden movements or loud voices. You have a gift for reaching the unreachable students, Dr. Martinez, my favorite professor, told me during my student teaching semester. It's like you can see their pain even when they're trying to hide it. I graduated with honors in 1972 and immediately began teaching at an inner-city elementary school where many of the children came from troubled homes. It was challenging work, underfunded classrooms, overcrowded conditions, kids who came to school hungry and scared, but also deeply rewarding in my classroom. I created a safe space where children could learn and grow without fear. I developed techniques for recognizing signs of abuse and neglect, for building trust with traumatized young minds. Some of my colleagues thought I was too involved, too emotionally invested in my students' lives. They didn't understand that these children were my redemption, my chance to be the adult I had needed when I was their age. It was during my third year of teaching that I encountered Sarah, a 7-year-old girl who reminded me painfully of myself at that age. She was withdrawn, constantly fearful, and bore the telltale signs of physical abuse, bruises that were explained away as accidents. A desperate eagerness to please, a way of shrinking into herself when adults raised their voices. Sarah's situation forced me to confront a difficult truth, knowing what I knew. Having lived through what I had lived through, I had a responsibility to act. I couldn't save my younger self, but I could save this child and others like her. That's when the idea began to form in my mind, the seed of what would eventually become the Morning Light Center. If I could create a place where girls like Sarah could find safety, support, and healing, maybe I could transform my own painful past into something that served a greater purpose. Maybe the terrible choice I had made at 16 could somehow be redeemed through the lives I helped save in the years that followed. Sarah's case broke my heart and changed my life forever. This beautiful little girl would show up to my classroom with new bruises every week, each one accompanied by increasingly creative explanations from her stepfather. She fell down the stairs. She ran into a door. She's so clumsy, that one. I recognized the pattern because I had lived it. The careful placement of injuries, where they wouldn't show in short sleeves, the coaching of the child to repeat the fabricated stories, the way Sarah would flinch whenever I moved too quickly or spoke too loudly, her dark eyes constantly scanning for danger, even in the safety of our classroom. What made it worse was that Sarah adored me with the desperate love of a drowning child, clinging to a life preserver. She would volunteer to stay after school to help clean erasers or organize supplies, anything to delay going home. She brought me drawings, disturbing images of stick figures being hurt by larger stick figures, houses that were always dark and scary looking. One afternoon, as I was helping her with her reading, she looked up at me with those enormous, haunted eyes and whispered, "Miss Isabella, do you think some daddies are bad?" My heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "My stepdaddy does things, things that hurt. And he says if I tell anybody, something terrible will happen to Mama." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "But it hurts, Miss Isabella, it hurts so much." I knelt down beside her desk, my own eyes filling with tears as I remembered being exactly her age. Exactly that terrified, exactly that alone. "Sarah, honey, listen to me very carefully. What your stepdaddy is doing is wrong. It's not your fault, and you're very brave for telling me." That night, I called Child Protective Services and filed a formal report. I documented every bruise. I had observed every concerning behavior, every red flag that had been waving for months. I testified at hearings, provided evidence, fought tooth and nail to get that little girl removed from a dangerous situation. It took 6 months, during which I watched Sarah continue to suffer while the system moved with agonizing slowness, but finally, she was placed in a safe foster home with a family who understood trauma and knew how to help her heal. The day Sarah left my classroom for the last time, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for believing me, Miss Isabella. Nobody ever believed me before." That hug changed everything. Standing there in that empty classroom, holding that brave little girl, I realized what my life's mission was supposed to be. I couldn't undo what had happened to me, couldn't bring back my father to face proper justice, couldn't erase the choice I had made at 16. But I could use my experience, my understanding of trauma, to help other girls who were walking the same dark path I had walked. That evening, I went home to Thomas and shared my revelation. "I want to start a center," I told him as we sat on our front porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline gold and pink, a place where girls who've been abused can find safety, healing, and hope. Thomas, bless his heart, didn't even hesitate. "What do you need from me?" he asked simply. We started small, very small. In 1975, we converted our spare bedroom into what we called our emergency room, a place where a girl could stay for a few nights while we figured out longer-term arrangements. Word spread through the network of teachers, social workers, and counselors who worked with at-risk children. And soon we were getting calls at all hours. The first girl who came to us was Maria, a 15-year-old who had been sexually abused by her uncle. She arrived on our doorstep at 2 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday night, soaked to the skin and shaking with terror. Her mother had thrown her out of the house when she reported the abuse, calling her a liar and a troublemaker. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Maria sobbed as I wrapped her in one of my quilts and sat her down at our kitchen table with a cup of hot chocolate. "The counselor at school gave me your address. She said you might help." Maria stayed with us for 3 weeks while we worked with the authorities to find her a safe placement. During that time, I watched her transform from a broken, terrified child into a young woman beginning to understand her own worth and strength. When she left us to live with a wonderful aunt in Birmingham, she was standing straighter, smiling again, making plans for her future. "You saved my life," she told me. On her last day, not just from him, but from believing I deserved what happened to me. After Maria, the girls kept coming. Jessica, who had been trafficked by her own mother, Carmen, whose stepfather had been molesting her since she was 10, Denise, who had run away from a foster home where the father was abusing multiple children. Each girl carried her own story of betrayal and pain, but also her own spark of resilience, waiting to be rekindled. By 1978, our spare bedroom wasn't enough. We bought a larger house, then another, eventually establishing what we officially named the Morning Light Center, because every girl deserved to see the dawn of a new day. Free from the darkness of her past, Thomas threw himself into the project. With the same passion I felt, he handled the administrative side, the fundraising, the legal requirements, while I focused on direct care and developing our treatment programs. We worked 18-hour days, slept little, and poured every cent we had into building something that could truly make a difference. The center wasn't just about providing temporary shelter. We offered counseling services, educational support, life skills training, and most importantly, a community of people who understood trauma and knew how to help girls heal from it. We partnered with therapists who specialized in childhood sexual abuse, with lawyers who could help girls navigate the legal system, with educators who could help them get back on track academically. But perhaps the most powerful element of our program was the way the girls helped each other. There's something transformative about realizing you're not alone, that other people have walked your path and survived. The older girls mentored the younger ones, and gradually we built a family of survivors who were learning to thrive rather than merely survive. Margaret joined us in 1980, bringing her social work expertise and her own understanding of trauma to our mission. Rose, who had become a teacher like me, volunteered at the center whenever she could, working especially with the younger girls, who reminded her of herself at that age, protected by sisters, who refused to let the darkness consume her. By 1985, the Morning Light Center had helped more than 200 girls. We had expanded to include a residential facility that could house up to 25 girls at a time, plus our outreach programs that served dozens more. We were getting recognition from state and federal agencies, receiving grants and donations from people who believed in our mission, but the real measure of our success wasn't in numbers or awards. It was in letters like the one I received from Sarah, the little girl whose case had started it all on her 18th birthday. "Dear Miss Isabella, I wanted you to know that I'm graduating high school next month with honors, and I've been accepted to nursing school. I want to help people the way you helped me. I remember being 7 years old and thinking I would never be safe, never be happy, never be loved. You proved me wrong. You showed me that surviving isn't enough. We're meant to thrive. Thank you for saving not just my life, but my future. Love always, Sarah." Reading that letter sitting in my office at the center, surrounded by photos and artwork from hundreds of girls we had helped, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a child, complete peace with the choices I had made. Now, as I sit here at 86 years old, looking back on a life that began in darkness but found its way to light, I want to share with you what I've learned about justice, about healing, and about the power we all have to transform our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths. The Morning Light Center has now helped over 800 girls and young women over the past 4 decades. Some stayed with us for just a few weeks while we helped reunite them with safe family members. Others lived with us for years, becoming part of our extended family while they healed and grew strong enough to face the world on their own terms. Many of those girls are now women with families of their own, breaking the cycles that might have destroyed them. They're teachers, nurses, social workers, business owners. Mothers who know how to protect their children because they learned what protection looks like. They send me Christmas cards with photos of their babies, graduation announcements, wedding invitations, proof that surviving trauma doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful life. Thomas and I never had biological children of our own, but we've been parents to hundreds of girls who needed us. He passed away 5 years ago, my gentle, patient husband who stood by me through everything, who never once asked me to reveal the secrets I wasn't ready to share. Even at the end, when cancer was taking him from me, he squeezed my hand and said, "I'm so proud of the life we built together, Isabella, so proud of all the girls we saved." I miss him every single day, but I know he'd be pleased to see that the center continues to thrive under new leadership. Margaret's daughter, Rebecca, now runs the day-to-day operations, bringing fresh energy and modern approaches to our mission. The center has expanded to include 3 facilities across Georgia, and we're planning to open our first location outside the state next year. Margaret herself found peace in religious life, becoming a nun who works with orphan children in rural Alabama. She writes to me regularly, and her letters are filled with stories of hope and healing. "I understand now why everything happened the way it did," she wrote in her last letter. "God used our pain to create something beautiful, something that helps others find their way out of darkness." Rose became a pediatric nurse and works at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, specializing in cases involving child abuse. She married a wonderful man named David, and they have 3 children who call me Grandma Bella. Rose and I have had many conversations over the years about our childhood, about the choices that were made, about the way trauma can either destroy us or transform us into something stronger. "I don't remember much about Father," she told me recently, as we sat in my garden watching her youngest daughter play among the flowers, "but I remember feeling completely safe with you and Margaret. I remember knowing that no matter what happened, you would protect me." That's a powerful gift to give a child, the knowledge that someone loves them enough to fight for them. As for the secret I've carried for 65 years, the truth about what really happened to Harrison Mitchell, I've made peace with that choice. Was it right? Was it wrong? I honestly don't know, and I've stopped torturing myself trying to decide. What I know is that a dangerous man who was hurting children was stopped, and 3 little girls got the chance to grow up safe and whole. I've never told the complete truth to anyone, not even Thomas, not even my sisters. Some secrets are too heavy to share, even with those we love most. But I've learned that keeping a secret doesn't have to mean carrying shame. I made the best decision I could with the knowledge and options I had at 16 years old, in a world that offered no protection for girls like me. Would I do it again? That's a question I can't answer because it exists in a reality that no longer exists. Today, there are laws protecting children, hotlines for reporting abuse, organizations like our center that offer hope and help. The world isn't perfect, but it's different. Better, safer for vulnerable children than it was in 1963. For those of you who might be listening and facing your own impossible situations, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and more valuable than anyone has ever told you. If you're being hurt, please reach out for help. Call the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. Contact your local police. Tell a teacher, a counselor, a trusted adult. Keep telling until someone listens and takes action. And if you're an adult who suspects a child is being abused, please don't look the other way like so many people did in my childhood. Be the adult that child needs. Report your suspicions. Ask difficult questions. Be willing to get involved, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. The cycle of abuse continues when good people choose silence. It breaks when brave people choose to speak up and act. I'm 86 years old now and I won't be here forever, but the Morning Light Center will continue long after I'm gone, helping girls find their way from darkness to dawn. That's my legacy, not the terrible choice I made at 16, but the thousands of lives that were saved and healed because of what grew from that choice. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you've listened to an old woman share her deepest secret after 65 years of silence, then you have my gratitude. It wasn't an easy story to tell or to hear, but these are the stories that need telling. These are the truths that can set us free. Before you go, I want to ask, you too do something for me? Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because there are more stories like mine that need to be heard. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe someone who's struggling with their own impossible situation, or someone who works with children and needs to understand the signs of abuse. And if you're ever in Savannah, Georgia, you're welcome to stop by my house. I'll make you some sweet tea and cornbread and we can sit on my porch and talk about how beautiful life can be when we refuse to let our past define our future. My name is Isabella Rose Mitchell, but you can call me Miss Bella. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about the children who need our protection. And remember, even in the darkest moments, there's always hope for morning light. The secret I kept for 65 years is finally free, and so am I. Bless you all.